Well, as Rao mentioned, the traditional concept of premium financing works really well, assuming all the ducks line up in a row and everything works perfectly. And as we know, that's not how life works quite often.
You're
So
right. You're right. Go
we've
ahead.
got to build a hedge of protection around the strategy so that in the event that the worst case perfect storm happens, even if it's unlikely to happen, we still want to plan and be prepared for the worst. So, what happens if the policy doesn't perform at the same time that the premium financing borrowing rate increases to the point where the client's policy goes into a negative arbitrage situation, right? That's always the biggest risk. And if that were to happen, what would happen to the policy? What would happen to the client? In a lot of the more traditional premium financing setups, and some of these, what I would call kind of overly aggressive, over leveraged, gimmicky type of programs that are out there right now, what will happen is the client will end up losing. The challenge with our industry as a whole, I believe, is that the carrier software does not allow us to show a client what happens in the event of volatility in index returns and what happens if the sequence of that volatility is unfavorable, meaning that we hit several negative index returns up front in the beginning of the policy, in which case the policy would credit zero, right? What would happen if that were to happen? So I'll address some of those issues as we go along here. We have several different premium financing programs that we offer clients. We can do the traditional vanilla type of setup. We can do several different types of programs, but the one I'll talk about today is what we call responsible leverage. It removes a lot of the risk, almost all of the risk, and it's very easy for the client to understand. So let's go ahead and begin here. We start off with a very easy to understand funding program for the client. We have them fund the same amount annually for a 10-year period. And the reason we're able to do that is that we've been able to lock in a 10-year fixed borrowing rate. Currently, that rate is 4.5%. We have an exclusive lending relationship with this particular program with Gracie Point. And so it's nice for the client because they don't have to worry about borrowing rate increases for the full 10 years. It gives them a level of certainty that they will just not have with any other type of premium financing design. We exit that loan in policy year 11. So again, it's a 10-year fixed period certain outlay for the client, in which case the client does not need to post any outside collateral. I had a CPA ask me, when you say no outside collateral, there must be a situation that could occur in theory where the client would have to post collateral outside of the policy value. So they asked me, what scenario would that look like? So we ran several stress tested models, and in most cases, the policy would have to experience 8 zero index credits in the first 8 years of the policy to trigger an outside collateral need. That gives clients an unbelievable amount of certainty and security. So no outside collateral. Assume there's no outside collateral. There's also no personal guarantee that the client needs to sign on the loan. We do not use any high early cash value riders on the policy, so there's no spread comp for the agent. Again, so no gimmicks, no little tricks. And we do not do any sort of interest accrual in this model either. So again, we're de-risking this premium financing design to the maximum. So what I'm going to show you here, again, we call this responsible leverage. I'm going to show you a comparison here. A non-financed IUL compared to our omakase pension alternative. Again, this is one of several different premium financing programs that we have. And in this comparison, we're going to use this exact same carrier, exact same product. We're going to use the exact same annual outlay for the exact same period of time, which is going to be a 10-year period. So again, we're using a non-financed 10-pay versus a 10-pay design using our omakase design. And because of the fixed borrowing rate, we have fixed interest payments and no collateral variables. So what I'm going to show you here is we're going to go down the rabbit hole and get moderately detailed. I can go way down the rabbit hole and get unbelievably detailed if you want me to do that.
No, let's not do that.
Okay. just know that we have the capability to do so if it comes to that. So I'll talk general concepts, and then we can address the details as questions come in here. So what we're looking at on the screen here, this is just a standard vanilla non-finance 10-pay IUL. $50,000 a year in outlay. This is on the left-hand side of the screen over here. So $50,000 annual premium for 10 years. This buys a 46-year-old client $1.1 million in face. And then we see here, starting at age 65, the client starts drawing down $93,000 in income. Okay, so if we take that, and again, this is usually what the client is looking at as an alternative to our program. This one, it just so happens to be Allianz, but we can work with a variety of different carriers: Pac Life, Penn Mutual, Securian, Zurich, Global Atlantic, National Life Group. Pretty much any carrier that has a good, strong, cash value-oriented IUL, we can work with. And we've been approved by all those carriers I just mentioned. So if we compare this to our program over on the left-hand side here, we have the same $50,000 annual outlay for a period of 10 years. And what we have done here is design a policy where some of the premium is being paid from this $50,000 annual budget. Some of the premium is being borrowed, which is in this column right here, the lender premiums column. So some of the premium is being paid out of pocket, some of the premium is being borrowed, and of the borrowed premium, the interest payments, which are over here in this column right here, the interest payments are also being funded by this $50,000 annual outlay that the client is paying. So it makes it nice and clean and easy for the client to understand. They're just cutting $50,000 checks annually for a period of 10 years. And as you see over here in this green column, we're paying off the third-party lender in year 11 using a policy drawdown. Okay, so it's a very unorthodox design because in years 1 and 2, the actual policy premium in this case is $40,761. So in year 1 and 2, that $40,000 premium is being paid from the $50,000 client budget. Okay, starting in year 3, of that $50,000 client budget, the client is paying $38,000 in premium, again from the $50,000 budget. They are borrowing $201,000 in premium from the lender, of which they're paying interest payments, in this case $9,350. Now that $9,350 is being funded from the $50,000 budget, as is this $38,000 premium that's not being borrowed, over here in the left-hand column. Okay? So again, making it simple for the client to understand and to budget. Again, all they know is they're cutting a check to the lender for $50,000 per year. Some of that $50,000 is being peeled off to pay premiums to the carrier. Some of it is being used to fund the interest payments on the borrowed premium from the lender. What makes this really interesting here is if I page back up to the summary, or page down to the summary rather, and I'll blow this up a little bit here. This just gives you an idea of what the comparison is. Oop, give me 1 second. There we go. Between the non-financed version and the financed version. Let me shrink this down just a little bit. Here we go. So on the left-hand side, we have the non-finance policy. On the right-hand side, we have our omakase pension alternative design. Total client contributions is the same, $50,000 a year for 10 years, so that's $500,000. The difference really kicks in here when it comes to face amount. So the initial face amount for the non-finance policy, again, same exact product, same carrier, same budget for the client. The non-finance policy is going to buy them 1.1 million in face versus in our program they're getting 3.25 million in face. So drastically more face amount. When we draw the income down, we're drawing down 1.97 million in income total in the non-finance policy versus 2.1 million in our program. And after 40 years, the ending cash value in the non-finance policy is 211,000 versus over $500,000 in our program. And so we look at the IRRs there. We have significantly better IRR and tremendously more face, almost triple the face amount for the same outlay for the client. Now, the beautiful thing, again, compared to some of these other programs, there are no other variables outside of the outlay and the policy performance, right? We have a fixed borrowing rate, which gives us a fixed outlay. There's no interest accrual. We're actually paying the interest out of pocket every year from that $50,000 budget. So the only variable in our program is the policy performance, which is the same variable in the non-finance policy. But we've been able to leverage up the face amount to almost triple the amount and to end up with about $500,000 greater economic value from a cash value and income drawdown standpoint.
Right. Hey, Darren?
Sure.
I just wanted to add one more item here, very important item, because most people compare this to a qualified pension plan. And one of the things that's unique in this design that Darren has put together is if your client has a business, LLC, corporation, anything like that, after the first year, he's so smart to come up with the documents, loan documents, in such a way that the premium contribution or the interest that you pay is tax deductible. And we don't have enough time today to talk about that, but it is a combination of tax deductions, tax-free growth, and tax-free income, which is unheard of. So for those people that understand and do the homework, this is a phenomenal tool. It's not for everybody, but it's only for high-quality people like we have online here that can use this for all your clients. Okay? Please go ahead.
Yeah, very good. The last thing I'll talk about, and then we can open it up to questions, is the back testing and stress testing. So again, one of the challenges I have with the premium financing industry as a whole is that most of the proposals I've seen, they show the policy performing at, say, 6%, and they show the borrowing rate at 4%, and so you've got a guaranteed 2% positive arbitrage every year. Well, there's one thing we know, and is that is never going to happen in reality. The problem is that most of the carriers' stress testing recommendations, they just show a lower index credit every year. But the problem is that it's always positive every year. And if you have a policy that's showing a positive index return every single year that just so happens to be greater than the borrowing rate, well, of course, that's going to look good on paper. The reality is that's not how things work in reality. So what we've done here is we have built our own internally produced software that allows us to take the carrier policy illustration data, dump it into our program, and then reconstruct the policy using back-tested index performance with volatility. So I'll talk about that real briefly. So we use 3 different 40-year periods. The first one is pretty straightforward. It's just the last 40 years of the S&P 500 returns. So we apply the carrier's floor and the cap, and if they have a multiplier charge and a multiplier bonus, our software has the ability to model that as well. And just to give you an idea of what has happened over the last 40 years of the S&P, the compounded annual growth rate of the S&P 500 over the last 40 years has been 11.84%. That's not the average return. That is the actual compounded annual growth rate. That includes the S&P dividends. Not including the S&P dividends, the compound annual growth rate is 8.86%. Now that's been a pretty good 40-year run. The second 40-year period is we take the last 20 years of the S&P 500, and we take that 20-year period and we just run that back to back to create a hypothetical 40-year period. The reason we did that, several reasons we did that. One is that in the last 20 years, the S&P compound annual growth rate has not been as good as it has been over the last 40 years. It's been about half as good. So if we look at the compound annual growth rate over the last 20 years, including S&P dividends, it was 6.01% compared to 11.84%. And if we look at the returns, not including the dividends, compound annual growth rate of the S&P over the last 20 years, 3.99% versus 8.86%. So a little bit less than worse, a little bit worse than half the returns that we've gotten over the last 40 years. Now, the ultimate stress test that we use, we built a 40-year period that we call the sandwich. The sandwich consists of the worst decade, the worst 10 years, which is years 2000 through 2009, and we use that 10-year period in years 1 through 10. We repeat it again in years 31 through 40, and sandwiched in between there are the last 20 years of the S&P. So if we look at this period of time, we're hitting the dot-com bust, the years 2000, 2001, 2002, 3 times within this 40-year period. We're hitting 2008 3 times within this 40-year period. And if we look at the compound annual growth rate of the S&P during this constructed period, 2.45% including the S&P dividends, and 59 basis points not including S&P dividends. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know any premium financing folks out there that are running carrier illustrations showing a 59 basis point index return for a 40-year period. This is very, very adverse.
There's nobody.
Yeah, it's very, very adverse. And because of our software capabilities, we're able to do this and show this using all of that volatility. So I'll show you what I mean in just a second here, and then we'll open it up to questions. So this is our sandwich period here, 2000 through 2009. We start off with -10, -13, -23% returns, which means the policy would credit 0, 0, 0. And then again in policy year 9, we have the year 2008. So we hit another 0 here in the 9th year. And then we repeat that 3 zeros in a row in years 11, 12, 13. And we repeat that 3 zeros in a row again in policy years 31, 32, 33. In this design...
So, Darren, what you have done, a great compliment to you is that you have come up with the most, worst kind of scenarios and things that pop up in the prospect's mind, and you brought it right out front. Before they even ask you, you put it all out front, so they have that in front of them, and that would alleviate a lot of concerns that people have, that you're not trying to hide anything.
Right.
I
mean, I've had some CPAs and advisors that started off the conversation very aggressive, very adversarial, very accusatory. And once we take them through this period, they end up being the biggest fans because they tell me straight up, they said, what you're showing here is so unlikely to happen, right? You're showing us an unrealistic worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Why do you do that? And I say, because if it works in an unrealistic worst case scenario, everyone goes to sleep well at night, and we have now run out of reasons to not do this. Because, again, what are the risks with premium financing that Rao mentioned at the beginning of the call? Interest rate inflation, lack of policy performance, collateral increases, collateral calls, right? Getting the policy in an upside-down situation. We've gotten rid of all that, right? No outside collateral. The policy would have to hit 8 zeros in a row in the first 8 years of the policy to trigger any outside collateral. In this case, the outside collateral requirement would be just over $7,000 in the 9th year of the policy if you hit 8 zeros in a row. So very little liability there. The borrowing rate, again, is locked in for a 10-year period, 4.5%. Some people say, well, 4.5% seems high. It's like, You're locking it in for 10 years. Go to any lender out there, especially for a policy this small. Right, this is a small policy under premium financing by premium financing standards that will lock in a rate for 10 years at 4.5%. It just doesn't exist. So we can go all the way down. If you look at policy year 3 here, we can go all the way down to $200,000 in annual premium borrowed once we enter the loan to get this done at that fixed borrowing rate at 4.5%. So again, you cannot get this anywhere else. And then again, lastly, there's no interest accrual, so you're not worried about the compounding debt on the interest accrual loan competing with the compounding debt in a policy loan. So we're getting rid of all those variables that make people sweat it out.
Right. I also wanted to add, Darren, that we don't work with all the agents that come to us. We are somewhat picky about the quality of agents because it's not as simple as just selling a policy and going away. There's a lot of hand-holding, a lot of maintenance. The real work comes up at the renewal time in premium financing. And there is financial underwriting. There are all kinds of underwriting requirements. So you may want to touch briefly about the financial underwriting, Darren.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Because the policy serves as the sole collateral in this design, this is I can circulate this to you, Rao, as well. Gracie Point just published this piece that's co-branded with us. Because the policy it serves as the sole collateral, the lender has to underwrite the client from the standpoint of a compliance standpoint, right? Know your customer, but they're not actually making an underwriting determination based off of the solvency and liquidity of the client. They're solely making the decision based on the rating of the carrier and the policy design. What that means is we can get these policy loans approved. Usually, we say within 5 working days, business days. It's usually done within a couple business days. Very, very, very quick, very, very efficient. Some clients are worried that they had a couple challenging business years or that they took a hit on their credit because they were over-leveraged in other areas. None of those issues become issues when it comes to getting your client underwritten for this type of loan. And then because it's a 10-year loan, similar to a 30-year mortgage loan, they're underwritten up front. But if we lock in that rate and we lock in that 10-year loan up front, they're not being re-underwritten every year. So for all parties involved, including the client, we're getting rid of all that pain in the butt, cumbersome re-underwriting the loan every year. The only thing we need to do is get an in-force illustration of the policy so that we can see what the policy value is to show, in this case, Gracie Point, assuming that they're the lender we use on the case. They just need to see what the policy looks like in terms of cash value. And as long as the surrender value is a minimum of 105% of the outstanding loan, everything's fine, right? No collateral, it goes through, and everybody's good. So again, it's just taking so much of the heavy lifting, and again, the pain in the butt administration of getting a loan underwritten and re-underwritten every year. We just remove all of that. There's a origination fee that Gracie charges to lock in that rate for 4.5%, but everything I've just discussed is all built into that client budget. So if the client says they're going to do a $50,000 annual budget or a $500,000 annual budget or whatever that is, everything is built into that, all inclusive of loan fees, etc. So again, from a client standpoint, they're writing that annual check, clean, easy, no variables.
Darren, is there a sweet spot for the age of the client if you're trying to use this?
Yes. It depends on what the goal is. So if the goal is accumulation and future income, I would say it caps off at early 60s. Once you hit age 65, depending on longevity, family health history and longevity, perhaps anything over age 65, I would probably not recommend All that being said, we had a client do this in their mid 60s, and I said, really, my fiduciary responsibility is to advise you against doing this because you really don't have enough runway from an age standpoint. And he says, look, everyone in my family has lived to their late 90s. He goes, I'm in my early 60s. So I think he was like 63. So 10 years out, he's 73, right? If he started income at 73 and took it out for 20 years, that would put him at 94. In his mind, he still has another 5 years of life expectancy left after 20 years of drawdown. So there are unique situations where, I have a client talking me into it as I'm trying to talk them out of doing our program, which is kind of ironic, right? And they're saying, no, this makes sense for me. So we are very conservative on all.
I just sent in, probably the paperwork for a 75-year-old couple, $35 million of life insurance that you guys just sent me. So it depends. It depends on the client. He doesn't need the cash. He wants death benefit.
Right.
So there's all kinds of different scenarios.
Yeah. If it's death benefit, it pushes the age up substantially. Sometimes we're going to have to get special carrier approval and exceptions because they don't like finance policy after a certain age. But obviously, if they're connected to the client's connected to RAW, RAW just waves his magic wand and the carriers bow down to him, do whatever he wants because he's Mr. Big Shot.
It's amazing. We got a lot of exceptions. I guess they're looking at who's underwriting the case. That's really the beauty of the whole thing. And so it's phenomenal. So let me ask you one last question. What is the largest policy that you financed?
Largest policies, it was a couple, 70 million in death benefit. It was, in that case, it was two separate policies. One was 40 million on the husband and 30 million on the wife. We've got a couple others in progress right now that are one's 40 million. One is you're gonna crack up. It was 99.9 million. Because
we got two billionaires. We're talking to, Darren.
Yeah.
And they're saying we'll take the maximum you can give me, like Malcolm Forbes. Barry K. wrote a policy. Mm-hmm. I guess it was 400 million. We may have a $400 million case, in the very near future. We're looking at that.
Yeah.
But it is available. The opportunities are unlimited. But when you are talking to people like that and cases like that, you need integrity. You need firepower. You need to have this kind of a scenario. And I can tell you 99% of the people we come across do not have the capacity like you have to illustrate that and to have a conversation. Mm-hmm. So it's so we feel that we are really very blessed and very lucky to have you guys working with us. And any questions we can take real quick, and then we'll move on to Eric Miller, who also is one of our very respected partners with tremendous integrity and background in financing part of it. Because this is not as simple as it looks. There are a lot of moving parts, and you got to be careful. You got the right kind of people in your team. So any other questions? I think there were a couple of questions in the chat box. What is a sweet spot? You already answered that. Do you have an example of a pure death benefit play? Yeah, we have them. We're also going to send you some books that Darren has written, a beautiful book, probably one of the best I have seen in premium financing. And Darren has been kind to give us a gift. And Amanda will be mailing you those books. And legacy goals, it depends. It depends on what the goals are. I guess that's so. We'll move on to Eric, and Darren will be on standby to take any more questions. Just write them up in the chat box, and we'll take it as they come. Okay. Anything else, Darren? You want to add?
I think that's good. That's good.
Thank you.
Terrific presentation, Darren.
Thank you.
I love your approach to the marketplace.